Hey guys, it's Frederik from the FWX podcast. I want to continue with my coverage of the John Wick franchise. I got this handy picture right here of all the 4 movies starring Keanu Reeves as John Wick. Yeah. I get another different picture of the 4th movie right here with him in front of the Eiffel Tower, because this movie takes place for a large part in Paris, and we'll get to that when I start covering this movie in this episode. But before I go off on that part, I'm gonna have to give you the disclaimer, of course. So first, my first language is not English, so that means I might still flub a word. I'm trying my best here, so that might still happen one way or another. Okay. Also, I might swear. That might happen or not. Depends on where we get. Also, I might have a weird pause. That usually happens if either I get ahead of myself, or I need to look something up on my screen, or because I lose my train of thought. And so, there's one more item I need to tell you about that. Yes, so I'm reading off my screen, and because of that, the screen will get brighter and I will get brighter. So, I thought you should know that. Okay. Also, I will be talking about the story and the characters. I'm gonna highlight the actors playing those characters with this picture. It's a handy one. It's a handy picture right here with all the actors. And we'll do that in a moment. But first I want to say, of course, for now, John Wick Chapter 4 is, as far as we know, the last movie of this franchise. Of course, I've told before in a previous episode that you have the Ballerina movie, which falls between number 3 and number 4 chronologically, and I will cover that one too when it comes out, and not just when it comes out, when I actually have seen it, so I can cover it for you. Okay, so let's start covering this movie. Okay, so we find John, of course, in New York City as he's recovering from getting shot by Winston and the fall he did off the Continental roof. And he is he's with the Bowery King. And this movie starts with, well, let me show you the person that plays the Bowery King for a moment. So there's this gentleman right here, Lawrence Fishburne, who plays the Bowery King. I'm gonna briefly say, we never really get to learn his name, except by the title that he has, meaning that he has a territory that he looks over in the criminal underworld of the John Wick franchise lore. And so he has a suit for John, as John is training himself to go out and take care of business. And our friend the Bowery King, played by Lawrence Fishburne, gives him this new suit. And the thing you need to know about the Bowery King is that he's very Shakespearean, I will say. He speaks in soliloquies, and for those who don't know what that is like a long monologue by himself, and in very many colors, as we say in Dutch, in geuren en kleuren. That's the phrase we would use. Okay, so John sets off to Morocco, where he was in the last movie, and he goes to find the elder, and that is the person that sits above the high table. And we get an interesting and fun chase scene with John and I'm gonna say the messengers of the elder, and he's chasing after them on horse with a gun, and he takes all of them out until he gets to the elder. And he and the elder have a conversation, and John demands his wedding ring back that he gave to the elder of all of a sudden I'm realizing I'm gonna look something up for a moment and then tell you about it, because, well, let me explain already. In the movie number 3, Parabellum, we see John meet the elder for the first time, and also in this one too, and I'm wondering, are they the same person or not? Because the elder says to John, "You killed the previous elder." So I'm looking this up for a moment. So yes, this is, of course, a different... Let me rephrase for a moment. So yes, this is a different character from the elder in Parabellum, also played by another actor. In Parabellum, the elder was played by Said Takamaui, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the elder in number 4, chapter 4, is played by George Georgiou. And I hope I said that right too. I probably didn't. I'm guessing I butchered this. Okay, anyway. The reason was because there was scheduling conflicts. So they got somebody else to play this role. Okay. Little behind the scenes tidbit for you guys to know. And so John and him have a conversation. John wants his wedding ring back when he not just took the wedding ring off, but had cut his finger off to get the wedding ring off. But not like fully. You see, like, part of it is still on him. Yeah. Okay. And in retaliation of this, the high table sends somebody new after John. And I will tell you about that in a moment too. Because there's an analogy made between John and the high table and somebody else. And so this new person responsible for the high table is a Frenchman, and it is a marquis named Vincent Bisset de Gramont, who now has an unlimited resources to kill John. In fact, they use a specific kind of title for him. I'm gonna look it up for just a second. They use a Latin phrase for this. But yes, he does act like a judge, jury, and also executioner. But there's a specific Italian phrase, Latin phrase that is used. I'm looking it up as I'm working here. Firmitas servituium unitas dominatio. Strength, service, unity, domination. And it basically means that by the unity of the dominion. So someone standing in for the high table as one person with all the unlimited resources of the high table. And that includes those troops that we saw from the third movie. And this Marquis is played by this man right here, Bill Skarsgard, who plays this role very convincingly, I will add. And he's an aristocrat from France. And that's of course why he has the title of a Marquis, of course. And so Bill plays this role, and he summons our two other main characters from this franchise, and that is Ian McShane's Winston, the owner and manager of the Continental in New York, and his concierge Sharon, played by Lance Reddick, as this was one of his last roles before he unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago now. And he chastises the manager as he failed to kill John, as the high table requires of him, per the consequences of John's actions from the previous movies. And so as a new punishment, the Marquis strips Winston of his roles as a manager and declares him excommunicado. And by the way, in this scene in the movie, we see I'm gonna call it a sand clock. You know those kinds of, I'm gonna say it like I see it in the movie, like an infinity sign pointed up, like this, and with the sand coming through it. There's probably a proper name for it, but I don't know it. And so Winston is watching this thing as the Marquis is talking. And as the sand goes to the bottom of this thing, the Continental New York explodes. And that is part of the punishment that they are getting. They are declared excommunicado, the Continental is destroyed, and the Marquis also says that now that you no longer have property, you no longer have a need for a concierge. And so the Marquis kills Sharon with a gun. And we cut to another moment with the Marquis, where he is in his fancy chateau. I'm guessing in France, where he has let someone come to him that was also very known to John, that John used to know. And this is someone called Kane, who in this movie, I'm gonna show you the picture of the person playing the role. Oh, yes, here he is. He's played by this actor, Donnie Yen, who is an action star. And Donnie Yen plays Kane, an old assassin of the high table. In fact, he has retired from his job. And so the Marquis played by Bill Skarsgard, enlists Kane to go and kill John. And to make sure that he does it, the Marquis threatens to kill Kane's daughter, who's been away for a very long time. And we might see her in the spin-off that has been announced and that they are working on with Kane. Because what's interesting about Kane is what we learn a bit later is that he is blind. And the reason why this is, we get the reveal a little bit later, but I'm not going to talk about that just yet. Okay, so meanwhile, John is in another place. He's in fact in Japan, in Osaka, and he has sought refuge there in the Continental, which is operated by another friend of him, a new person that we see in this movie, and that is Shimazu Koji, played by Ryoki Sanada, who you might know from the show Shogun, where he also plays a prominent role, and also in Bullet Train. He played an interesting role. Actually, in fact, I believe, because I've seen Bullet Train quite a few times, and it's a very good movie, he plays a role also called The Elder, which might be like a little Easter egg or something. Anyway, I thought that might be interesting to you. And so, the Osaka Continental is operated by him and his daughter, Akira, who is played in this movie by this lady, Rina Sawayama, the pop star. She plays his daughter, Akira. And in Japanese, it's said a little bit differently, of course. Correctly said. I didn't. Sorry. And so, the High Table has learned of John's location now, and the Marquis sends his people there. So both Kane and also one of his closest lieutenants or commanders or whatever title that guy has, named Shiri, and that's this gentleman right here, Marco Zaror, who plays Shiri. He is kind of like John in that he has a bulletproof suit and is a very good fighter and shooter, but he works for the Marquis. And so Shiri and Kane are there in the Continental about to investigate, and Koji and his daughter evacuate the hotel as they are dealing with these high table people. And Shiri has the power through the Marquis to deconsecrate a Continental. And he does this. And this leads us into a fight in this movie. And we get to see two very opposite sides, with Shiri and his men that the Marquis owns, and also the enforcers of the High Table that come to play here with our modern kind of weaponry, lots of guns, lots of advanced weaponry, machine guns, and on occasion knives for close quarters, of course. And then the other side with Koji and his daughter in a way more traditional kind of weaponry with daggers and also the samurai swords that people in old times used in Japan, and bows too. And so we see these two opposite sides fighting each other, and it's a very interesting way of seeing just how different people are based on their weaponry. I've said before in the episode on Parabellum that action tells us a lot about a character and their motivations and how they work and what the kind of style they adhere to. And so we see that here very closely here. And so we have a fight between those two forces all out through the Continental, and of course with John too, who prefers, of course, guns, but is really very gifted with any kind of weapon that he finds. And of course, just like in Parabellum, we see that these elite troops of the High Table are very tough to take down, and so it takes, like, as we see in the movie, like, you need to tilt their head and kind of get them in the right place to get the blind spot that they have in their armor. So it gets them in the place where you need to hit them to really get them. So you need to get in close, actually. And so we get a lot of scenes like this in this action sequence where ranged weapons don't necessarily fail, but really are stopped by very strong armor. Either if it's a fancy bulletproof suit or the kind of armor plating that is equal to what the Persians used in their wars with the Immortals. That's kind of the same look that these High Table enforcers have. Very iron plated, very masked too. They kind of have a skull as a mask for themselves. And so we get a lot of scenes like this with everybody fighting. And also here's where we see what Kane's fight style is. And because he is blind, he has a bit of a different style of doing this. And so there's a specific scene, in fact, where he's going up against people that are more like him, with Koji's men in the Continental in Osaka. And he uses like a little device that alerts him of coming danger. And he plants this all over this room in a kitchen, I believe. And it goes off when somebody comes close to it. It actually passes it. And so he uses the same kind of weaponry like Koji. He uses both a pistol or a handgun and a sword, a katana-like thing. But he's also using the same thing to step, because as a blind person, he has a different style. He deals with this in a different way. And so this very much informs who he is in this moment, that he is not bound by his disability, but it is part of who he is, but he doesn't let that stop him. He doesn't let that assuage. Okay. So there's a lot of great scenes like these. We get a fight between Akira and these troops from the Marquis. We see John, of course, kicking ass. Koji, the character that Sonata plays too. We really see a lot of that. And so that leads to John and Kane meeting each other again. Until he comes across somebody else that is for the first time in this movie, who is a tracker called Mr. Nobody. A bounty hunter, in fact, because he just does this for the money, as he makes it clear in this moment and later in the movie too. And he interrupts the fight with Kane and John, as he is using kind of like something between a long rifle and a shotgun, basically. And he's played by this man right here, Shamir Anderson, and I hope I pronounced his name correctly. Like, Anderson is sounds pretty normal, but then I hope I said his first name correctly. Okay, so he plays Mr. Nobody. He interrupts the fight between John and Kane, and he lets John escape because he doesn't find this bounty that is on John enough for him to get. And we exit this action sequence with Kane and Koji meeting each other as Koji is leading Akira to a part where they can rest for a moment because she got hit in a tough place, and as he settles her down to sit, she also sees that he has been wounded in almost the same kind of place, that he got hit by a bullet, or more than one maybe. And so Kane and Koji fight. Again, I'll show the pictures again. So Sanada's character and Donnie Yen's character meet each other and they fight. Because Koji still believes in love and he wants to fight for it. And this leads to Kane reluctantly killing Koji. And as Kane does this, we get a glimpse at what exactly happened to Kane, because we see him with his glasses off and we see his eyes, except that he no longer has any irises, so he literally cannot see despite still having most of his eyes. And so Kane decides that, yeah, I had to do this. There was no other choice. But he does spare Akira, and he tells her to go, because he does not want to kill anybody else. And per talk about this franchise, we're likely to see them again, because it's been announced that Kane is gonna... Well, there are rumors that Kane is going to have a spin-off movie, and they're working on it, I believe. I haven't heard those specific rumors, but when it did came out, and it did well, of course, the movie, John Wick IV, and there was an interest to do a fourth movie. A spin-off movie with Kane and with other characters like Akira, for instance, because she wants to get back at him for killing her father. Okay. Let's continue with this movie. So, John, by the way, meets Akira on the bullet train as she also promises to him, either you kill him or I will kill Kane. And so, John returns to New York and we meet up with him at the graveside where Winston has laid Charon to rest, Charon to rest, and they have an interesting conversation about what needs to be done now. And so, also, there's this moment between the two of them here where they talk about what do you put on someone's gravestone? Like, a few words to define someone through their whole life. And what do you put there? And this is gonna come back in a moment later. And so, Winston says to John that you need to do this smart. If they're gonna keep coming after you, you need to take them down in a way that will allow you to get free and live the life that you want. And so, Winston, here's where that analogy that I said before comes in. he says, Winston says, and this is a direct quote, Hercules had his Hydra, you have the high table. Meaning that one head of the table can be replaced with another, just like the Hydra with Hercules, or actually Heracles, you're supposed to say. But I'm guessing that Winston was talking about the Roman version of the myth of Heracles. Because in Roman tradition, you say Hercules, not Heracles, as the Greeks do. That's a little tangent right there. Okay. So, there's one way for John to do this the right way. And that is for him to challenge the Marquis in a duel. And John is unconvinced at first because he thought that those duels were myths. But apparently, that is a cold, hard fact. Another direct quote from Winston in this moment. And so John goes to Paris to challenge the Marquis to this duel. But there's one more little important detail here. John can only challenge the Marquis if he is part of a crime family. And so there's something else he needs to do first, and that is to go mend his family ties with the Roscaroma, who are stationed in Berlin. And so John goes to Berlin first, where the Roscaroma have their headquarters, and he needs to re-enter this group that he was once part of. And so he has a confrontation here with the leadership. And there's a fun scene here for a moment where just he needs to enter I think it's a church, where John goes into and then confronts the person giving the sermon at the moment. And we see once more for a moment just how powerful that kind of suit that he is wearing is, as this man doing the sermon just straight up shoots him with a shotgun. And John impacts it with the suit, and he holds it up like a real shield actually would. And so John goes to meet with the Roscaroma, including his sister, who is played by... her name is Katia, and she's played in this movie by this woman right here, Natalia Tena. And you might know her from an old role on the Harry Potter series where she played Nymphadora Tonks, the metamorphosis person in the Order of the Phoenix. And so they meet again. And Katya says to John that there's only one way for you to join us again, and that is to kill the man that has killed her father. And this is a man called Hikila Harkan, which is yet another person part of the High Table that the Marquis had asked to take care of the Roscaroma's patriarch. And Killa Harkan, as we see in the movie, is played by a man in a fat suit. Get a picture here of him. Oh yeah, just right beside our man John Wick here. Killa Harkan is played by Scott Adkins, who is also a very well-known action actor. And so John goes to the place where Killa Harkan is based at, a nightclub. And first he has a conversation with him at a table, and we meet the other interesting people too. We see Kane again, we see Mr. Nobody again, and the four of them have a conversation as they're playing a game with cards, with Killer Harkin dealing the cards. And there's a very fun, genuine conundrum, as Killer Harkin says, of people wanting to kill each other for different reasons. For love, for money, for freedom, or straight up for revenge. And we get this scene, and of course, I'm gonna point out for a moment that Killer Harkin, I already said he's played by Scott Adkins, but you can barely see Scott in this image because Killer Harkin is a man with a lot of volume. I will say is literally broader. I'm guessing he's broader than me, and I do have a bit of volume myself, and so, but main difference being he doesn't have glasses, and also he has golden teeth. And so this quickly follows up with another incredible action scene. By the way, first I have to say that that card game is ultimately won by the card dealer himself. And there's this fun little in-between between Killer Harkin and Kane, as Kane just accurately says what the sleight of hand is that he has, and it's a 5 of a kind, which trumps all the other cards that the others have. And this is followed, of course, and Killer also says to John, like, I was the one that killed your father, your patriarch from the Rusca Roma crime family. And we get a lot of action scenes here too, where John and both Kane and also Mr. Nobody fight off Killer Harkin's guys. And this starts off in a kind of a funny way, as John slices Killer Harkin with one of the cards that he's been dealt with. And so there's a giant action scene here yet again. Very well shot in the place they're at, where they're playing the card game. But then also to the nightclub itself, where this is based. And we get a lot of interesting shots of John taking on a Killer Harkin and his men. And there's a lot of them, of course. And we get our traditional cool John Wick being a badass action. And here we see a different kind of action scene though, because there's barely any use of firearms in the later part here, because as John runs out of bullets, he has to confront those guys that Killer has, and they're all using kind of like hatchets and axes. And ultimately, well, there's a fun little moment, of course, when one of the last bullets that John fires, it goes straight into Killer's ass. And we get the next confrontation between the two of them in this sequence, and Killer says in his accented voice that John shot him in the ass, of course. And so we follow this up with more of the action, John fighting off Killer's henchmen, but ultimately coming to a blows, as actually this man, Killer Harkin, is actually a very capable fighter, despite being of more volume. And ultimately John does get the drop on him and gets him, just this a multi-layered room, the nightclub, and there's a ton of people, of course, just having their life, dancing with all their might, and there's a lot of them like that in this room. And John literally kicks Killer off this higher part, and So Killer falls, of course, on his head, which kills him, of course. And John, in order to make sure that he has killed Killer, needs to have proof. And so John knocks one of those colon thieves loose and takes it to the headquarters of the Ruska Roma crime family. And here we get like a traditional kind of I wanted to say sacrifice, but that is not the right word. Like a readmission kind of scene where John gets branded again. Literally branded, by the way. Like he gets a branded on the sides of a thing that has been heated already, and he needs to pressure his arm into this thing that is put onto it, and of course to cool it down in a more Eastern Europe Russian kind of way. They do it with a lot of vodka, like you see in the Rambo movies. Okay, let's continue here. And so John regains his status as part of the Ruska Roma, and we get a scene with Winston from the Continental, played, of course, by, I'm gonna show him again, Ian McShane. And we see Winston go and deliver John's challenge to the Marquis, because he is now because he is now a part again of a crime syndicate. And so Winston goes to give the Marquis his challenge, John's challenge to him. And in movie, we don't know where this location supposedly is, but when you see these scenes, you clearly see that this is being filmed in the fucking Louvre in France, of course. As if this guy couldn't be any more richer than the fucking aristocrat that he is. The Marquis, of course, not Winston. And so Winston lays out the rules for him, and also saying that per the duel, you need to have a second person. And so Winston is that for John, and also says that if John wins and kills the Marquis in this duel, John's excommunicado status will be revoked, and that the manager of the Continental will be reinstated as the manager, and the Continental will also be rebuilt, and it will be funded by the High Table. And of course, the opposite side of this challenge is that if John loses, Winston is also going to die. And so we cut to John meeting the Marquis in Paris on an iconic location. And here they finalize the terms of the duel, which ultimately comes down to a pistol, like dueling pistols, I'm talking here. Not like our modern kind of weaponry, but like how they did it in the old days when there was literally a duels for this, like for power's sake and all of that. And so they come to the final terms, and that is just dueling each other at sunrise at the Sacré-Cœur in Paris, under the moderation of someone called the Harbinger. And I should have said this earlier, of course, but I'll say it now because the Harbinger comes up here. The Harbinger is another interesting figure from the lore of this franchise. And in this movie, the Harbinger is played by yet another iconic actor, this man right here, Clancy Brown. And so we can see from his visage that he has a very notable scar, which makes him interesting to the lore. Maybe they might bring him back up for that K movie they are supposedly working on. Okay. And so, as John and the Marquis finalize the terms, the Marquis has one last request too, is that his second will be Kane, who is also there in that moment, and he will be the proxy for the Marquis to shoot. Also, the Harbinger says that if you get if you do not turn on if you do not arrive on time, you will be executed either way, because the Harbinger is part of the High Table Society, and so has the authority to do this. Yes. And we find John for a moment as he goes to a church nearby, and he goes and lights a candle to remember his wife, to give him the remembrance of why he is doing this exactly. That he is doing this because he wants out of the life, he wants to live for love again, per his turn in Parabellum at the later parts. And we see that Kay meets up with John in this church, and they have a sweet tender moment between them as they talk about the people they've lost. And for John, that's his wife Helen, and for Kane, that's his daughter, who is away, who might also come up in that spin-off movie they were supposedly working on. Okay, and John, following this, goes to visit the Bowery King, who once more is played in this movie by Lawrence Fishburne, who is now in Paris, and he has the much needed gear that John needs. Another new, as he says, ballistic chic suit for him, complete Kevlar top to bottom, and also a specialized gun for John to use, with an enormous magazine that he can put into the gun for him to shoot others with. Okay. And to make everything even more challenging for John, the Marquis sets up a bounty to delay John, to not get to the duel, because of course he's afraid he's going to lose. And so he puts up a bounty of $26 million on John to delay him. And we get scenes. Here's another interesting tidbit from this movie. The lore of the franchise allows the people around the world to communicate to each other, and we see heavily tattooed people serve the high table in functions that are relatable to communication. And one of those locations that they do this from is in that floor on the Eiffel Tower, where you can visit normally in real life. And so there's a person with kind of like a radio station kind of thing, and his very pretty, clear voice gives out the command for every assassin present in Paris to go and hunt John, to kill him. And John, of course, has to get to Sacré-Cœur at sunrise. And we get a lot of action here. Another huge action sequence where John fights off assassin after assassin, as they are now, differently from before, more armed with machine guns and assault weapons, and also lots and lots of guns, basically. And so John fights them off all throughout Paris, and we get scenes of him at the Arc de Triomphe, on the road around it, because it's a roundabout, of course, in Paris, and we get a lot of fun scenes of John fighting off these assassins. And we start off at the Arc de Triomphe, and we see that actually also John has a major weakness. He might have a high uh, tolerance for pain, but cars can still stop him, basically. That's what I'm saying here. And so we get these assassins. We get Sheedy, the second-handed man of the Marquis that is going after him. We follow John to interesting shots all between with all the action. And we get to a house where John goes into to fend for himself. And during this fight chase, we find Mr. Nobody, of course. I'm gonna show the actor who plays him again, Shamir Anderson. And something I should have said before, by the way. So, Mr. Nobody has a dog. And there was actually a funny scene in the Continental in Osaka where he says, like, because the Continental does not allow dogs to be inside in Osaka. And he says, no, it's not just a dog, this is my emotional support animal. So that's a funny joke. And we get that Mr. Nobody, just like John, has a lot of love for this animal, for dogs in particular. And also, I also jokes that she's not just my support animal, my emotional support animal. I'm her emotional support animal. And so we get a bit more like that here as John gets into a house. Also, there's some special bullets being used here, and we get also an interesting shot with John going into this house, and we see this like room by room overview shot of the place where John fights through it, and he uses this special kind of bullets that also set people ablaze on fire, and it's called Dragon's Breath, and he goes through room by room, and ultimately until he's confronted by Mr. Nobody, who finally finds enough money on that bounty to kill John too. And we get this moment between the two of them and Sheedy, the Marquis second hand. And John decides to... So the dog is also present here in this moment, and she's about to shoot the dog. And John decides that this is wrong, and he shoots Sheedy away, literally away, because he falls off another flight of stairs, and hard. And he lands hard. Sheedy lands hard on his body, on the floor, on the stairs. And this gives Mr. Nobody a moment to stop pursuing John, as he's like, oh, okay, he does have some standards, like not shooting dogs, for instance. And this gives us the last piece of action in this sequence, as John finds himself near the stairs to Sacré-Cœur, and he has to fight himself all the way up here, and he does this, of course, in incredible fashion. We get incredible shots until ultimately he is kicked off the stairs, and we see a long, arduous moment of John just falling and falling and falling until ultimately he is picked up by Kane, who also has to be at the top to meet with the Marquis for the duel. And before we continue, I'm gonna take off my jacket for a moment because it's getting hot in here. Okay. And So they fight their way back up. And here is where also Sheedy bites the bullet, quite literally. And so they finally arrive at the top. And there's a name for this flight of stairs leading to the Sacré-Cœur de Foyaté. I'm probably butchering that name. De Foyatier. Each is the flight of stairs that gets you to the Sacré-Cœur. Okay. And so finally they get upstairs, both wounded from this incredible long fight. And they have to face each other here, as now Kane is standing in for the Marquis as his proxy, as his second. And we get to get through 2 rounds of dueling as they shoot at each other. And Kane seriously wounds John, shooting him in the stomach and in the shoulder, or actually a bit more closely to the heart than the shoulder. And at the last moment, before Kane is about to deliver what is called a coup de grace, which is the last moment where you get to do a mercy killing, basically, the Marquis wants to step in with Kane. But then Winston comes between this moment and chides the Marquis for being so arrogant, finally revealing that John had not fired that last bullet yet, despite getting the last bullet of Kane. And so John then executes the Marquis with a shot to the head, and so ending the duel. And the Harbinger is then forced to litigate the rules that have been made up for the duel and give John and Kane their freedom, and also reinstating Winston as the manager of the New York's Continental. And John is, of course, heavily wounded by all of this after everything that he has been through, of all of the action that we see in this movie, and he reflects upon his life and upon the love that he had with his wife, and finally we see him collapse under all of that on the stairs of the Sacré-Cœur, and he seemingly dies. And here we cut back to New York sometime later as Winston and the Barry King bid farewell to John Wick at the gravestone for him at the same plot where Sharon, at a close plot to where Sharon lies, and John has a gravestone right next to his wife. And I'm gonna butt in about something I previously said about choosing a few words to define your whole life, to put it on a gravestone. And John wanted to have 2 simple words on his gravestone, and those words are good husband. And so John finally lays with his wife as they are no longer alive. Yes. And so Winston and the Barry King bid their farewell to their friend And then to end this movie, we have a rare moment at the very last part of the credits, as we have a scene here where Kane returns to Paris to see his daughter, but then he is also approached by Akira, the daughter of the Osaka Continental manager who was killed by Kane, and of course to get her revenge. And there's likely a spring off board for them to do the Kane sequel that is possibly being made right now. And so I'm gonna wrap this episode up, and I want to thank you for getting through this. This is a full-length hour episode of this movie because it very much deserves it. Also, the movie in itself is a very long one, but a very good one too. There's a lot of action in here, a ton of fucking action in here, but it also really conveys the message that you can live for those you love, even if you have such a dangerous job as an assassin, as John Wick does. And I want to thank you for watching and listening to me talk about this movie, about John Wick Chapter 4. And you can like this video underneath. You can also subscribe to the channel if you want more of this kind of content. And you can also comment if you like. In fact, I would love nothing more than some affirmation for me and for the channel so it can grow further. And finally, you can also share this with friends and family and people from work and people online, here on YouTube for instance. You can also follow me on social media if you like. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and other places too. And on TikTok, I give updates for when new episodes are out. And also on Blue Sky, by the way, where I recently did an update. So that's all that. Thank you very much for listening and watching to this episode of the FWX podcast. I've been Frederik, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.